Ship or skip, everybody we gotta tell us if you ship or skip.
Welcome to the Forward Slash, where we lean into the future of IT. I'm your host, Aaron Chesney, with my beautiful co-host, James Carmen. You know, James, today I was reflecting on my past and how I got to where I am today. And, you know, I chose technology as my path for my career. But, you know, when I was first starting out, I thought maybe of working in a factory of mirrors or working with mirrors. It's, you know, something I could really see myself doing.
Wow. That's a fantastic dad joke. I enjoyed that one very much so. You know, that reminds me of when I was a kid. My dad, he used to work on the road crew. You know what I mean? Maintaining roads and stuff like that. He worked there for many, many years, but he got fired for stealing. Yeah, we were all very surprised, but when we got home, all the signs were there.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
I get it.
What have I come on?
Do you want to just introduce our guest, Aaron, please?
Oh, sure. So, after almost 2 decades of web development and over a decade of consulting at companies from large enterprises to tiny startups, Adam has learned a thing or two about the business of the web. Former host of the Build IT Better podcast, a web-focused show about design patterns in development, and excruciatingly entertaining public speaker, Adam L. Barrett has all sorts of opinions on coding, design, architecture, business, intra-office politics, and board games. He also wants nothing more than to stuff them in your ears until you politely ask him to stop. Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you.
I love that excruciatingly entertaining, and
Yeah.
that's a perfect way to describe you, Adam. I love it.
I mean, I don't want to, let the audience see the little man behind the curtain working the levers or anything, but I may have written my own bio there. I'm just saying, might be.
That's not
something you
legal
wanna
in
know.
some states, but
But yeah,
we left out the Nobel Prize winning part, by the way.
well, I don't like to brag, is what it is. I don't like to bring that up. But yeah, no, I'm Adam L. Barrett. I, as mentioned before, have been the host of a couple of podcasts. I've made my career in sort of like going into companies and helping them write better, like JavaScript and front end sort of web focused code. I also dabbled in other programming languages a bunch early on, but I've really kind of taken the web as my focus for at least the last 13 years. And then, for about 7 years before that, oh man, realizing that I'm approaching the second decade and it's just making me feel old. But I have worked at places as big as, I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but I worked at places as big as Apple and Walmart Labs as a consultant, and as small as very 3 people startups. And so I've had a really good range of experience. I kind of learned a lot. And then I like to push that experience out onto other people and pretend I'm being helpful by just, allowing myself to say whatever I think as though it's right.
We call that consulting.
Yeah, I mean, that's it sounds good. Nobody wants a consultant that comes and goes, I don't know, what do you guys want to do?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never seen this before.
Yeah.
This is peculiar.
I don't have any opinion.
You guys have any idea how we'll fix this? So, I don't know. Yeah, nobody likes that consultant, to be perfectly honest.
So what is it like? The front end communities, it tends to kind of have a reputation of having more of a younger generation, right? As the, kind of the whippersnappers, right? So what is it like being someone who's had a lot more years of experience under his belt, working in that community and within those frameworks and everything? How's that experience been?
I would honestly say both frustrating and fulfilling at the same time. Looking at the stats, it's something like the amount of new people doubles every whatever it is, few years. I can't remember what the actual number is, but it's so there's constantly more new people than there ever were before in web development, just constantly coming in. And so I end up in this spot where I have a lot of people who are enthusiastic, but there's this strange thing that happens at about year 3 and maybe it's the Dunning-Kruger effect, maybe it's something else, but where they've learned enough that they know everything and there is no problem they cannot solve, and it's very hard to convince them that I know, I've been there, and I know what you're thinking, but trust me, I know what I'm doing. So I have this like balance of completely enthusiastic people who will listen and other people who I am constantly trying to convince. I swear to you, I really do know what I'm doing. I swear. I promise. It's only been my career for the last long time. I promise you I know what I'm doing. And it's seriously, I just feel like that is half my job, is convincing people I know what I'm doing. And it's come down into like tricks almost. Like I have a plan. I can almost recognize the people who are going to be trouble. And I like have this, it's kind of this, there's a movie that is like it. I can't remember what it's called. Oh, The Tao of Steve. The Tao of Steve. You ever see that movie? He's got this plan for how to impress women. And mine is like how to make myself known. I do something awesome first in front of them. And then they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then I like, help them do something awesome. And then they seem to respect me. And I have to like pick out the individuals who I have to do this with and stuff. But yeah, it's kind of funny, frustrating, and rewarding.
Of course, when I got out of high school, I already knew everything.
Oh,
and yeah.
I have a 12-year-old who knows everything. But
yeah, I was going to say,
13,
I was about 12
16.
or 13 when I knew everything. And then somewhere in my 20s, I think it was when something in society changed and suddenly I knew nothing. So
right, there was a lot more things around. Like for some reason, new things got invented that I didn't know about.
Weird points of view that I had never considered before.
Yeah. I think that's when aliens landed, and possibly, and took over, and I must not have gotten abducted with everybody else because I didn't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah, and they introduced the new math, and that was a big deal. The new math just
the new yeah, the new math really messed things up. That in Y2K, the new math and Y2K, those two things.
Y2K. Not to tangent too much, but did you actually I was kind of worried that night. I must admit, everybody else, we had a party at my friend's house, and I was like, the switch over from in case somebody is too young to know what I'm talking about, the switch over from 1999 to 2000, everybody thought computers were all going to crash, planes were going to fall out of the sky, blah, blah, blah. And I knew it wasn't going to happen because I know how computers work. But I was a little bit like, I wonder what is going to happen. Are these nuclear codes that are going to have a problem because they have 2 digits storing the date? But no, everything was fine.
Yeah, I was expecting something, just not anything catastrophic. I'm like, because everybody was like, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to get money, and the power grid's going to shut down, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, if anything, you're going to see maybe a flicker. Like the lights will go blink, or something like that. Or,
and then, like you said, the interesting thing was nothing.
Nothing.
Not even little glitches. Nothing I heard about. So I think that was probably both overestimating the problem, but also because a lot of people spent a lot of time for the decade leading up to it fixing those problems. But yeah, nothing was actually a surprise. Just absolutely nothing on Y2K.
See, I don't even remember being a decade. I remember it being maybe 3 to 5 years. It was like, oh, somebody goes, we're going to have a problem and it's coming up. We better get on this because everything is set to a 2-digit year and our systems don't know of anything before 1980. It's like, okay.
I don't know if it was a full decade, but I do remember in my first year of university computer science, which would have been, I think, 95, 96-ish, somewhere around there, the professor mentioning the Y2K problem. That was the first I had heard of it. And I was like, so maybe it just 5 years before, but I assumed if academia knows about it, other people must have known about it for years too.
Yeah. And having to it was funny how pervasive the issue was when you started kind of trying to fix that, the 2-digit problem. It was like pulling a thread, right? And in a lot of systems, it was just like pulling a thread, and you almost want to just say, okay, let's just scrap this whole thing, right? And start over from scratch, which was, we all like to do that, of course. But but does that even work when we scrap it? I mean, I don't know. Is that a thing?
That is a very interesting subject that maybe we could get into, because there's this thing that happens in software where every senior developer you ever know, every like software person who's got a little experience under their belt will tell you, don't scrap everything and rewrite it. Like that's the biggest mistake you can make, right? And if if that's the biggest mistake you can make, well then why does it keep coming up? And they say, oh well, it's the instinct, it's the junior instinct. Like, oh, you know what? I can't understand this. I just want to scrap it and rewrite the whole thing. I don't want to understand what's fixing and going on. Now, let me take a moment to get into my diatribe here, because I think that they might be wrong. And I'll explain why, because this is a blog post that I've actually been waiting to like thinking about putting out, but I'm worried about the backlash almost, because I'm worried about everybody going, wow, this guy does not know what he's talking about. This is an idiot. Don't listen to this guy. He's dumb. But the truth is, I have been a part of at least 2 very successful, complete, big pie in the sky rewrites. And everyone's like, what? Like, don't do that. It's the wrong choice. And I will say, yes, absolutely. It's probably the wrong choice. But every now and then you come into a project and it is so far gone. It is so bad. And it's not just a lack of understanding, because sometimes you try and work with it. You try and figure out where you're going to, what could we refactor to just make small parts better and then build around it and stuff. But sometimes you get to the point where this is becoming a problem. We can't add new features. Things are taking too long. And a complete rewrite might actually be the answer. And a complete rewrite comes, along with this like natural thing that you get to refactor a bunch of stuff anyway. Like, it's just going to happen because you're trying to rewrite the whole thing. You got to understand the requirements again. You got to figure stuff out. And I think that's where people would say, yeah, that's the biggest problem, because once you're doing that, you're going to lose all this knowledge that had been built into the system already. But I kind of feel like, yeah, but if you're afraid to touch stuff, that's a bad maintenance cycle. But I know that this is like, everyone's going to be screaming at me right now on their ears to be like, what are you talking about? Don't be dumb. But the problem, I think, is just how people go about doing the big rewrite, because the big rewrite is like, everybody thinks, oh, I got this idea. And I have been a part of many rewrites that were not successful too. And I kind of feel like I'm starting to pick up on the patterns. And for me, there's these patterns that are like, and I mean like the patterns of why they fail and why they pass, because there is patterns, like there's the strangler pattern where, oh, you rewrite the parts around it, and as you add more and more rewrite parts, the parts that are bad kind of like they get smaller and smaller, and eventually they go away. The problem is, most of the rewrites I've been a part of, it's like 2 years, 3 years, and they're still going. The rewrite will someday, oh yeah, we're halfway through, and someday we'll get going. And I kind of feel like that's the state of so many projects. I've come into a couple of projects where they're like, yeah, we're having trouble, we need somebody to help out. And they're like halfway through 2 rewrites. So we started a big rewrite, it never quite finished. Oh, and they started another big rewrite, and that one never quite finished. And, sometimes it's like switching, in the web and JavaScript world, it's like JavaScript frameworks. Oh, we went from like Angular to React, but now somebody convinced us to try this new thing, Svelte. And so we're kind of halfway through that too, but we've still got some Angular there, but we can't realize that. And so there are things that you can do to ensure you have a successful rewrite, and there are things that are going to ensure you have a bad big rewrite.
I think one of the things I've seen, I always thought, like, because I've been doing this a long time, and I'm kind of on the same side as you. Like, I do think a rewrite, now I probably tend to reach for that a little too often, but I tend to think that a rewrite is, they can be successful and they can be effective. I think one thing that I've seen in the past, when you do make the decision to rewrite, it's like, okay, how do we redo exactly what we did for the last 20 years again in a new language, new framework, whatever. It's like there's no rethinking of how can we better solve this user experience, and solve this problem for our users, all of those things. You've got the patient, like this is the patient's on the table. We can actually take care of something here. And people don't take those opportunities. That's, I think, one of the biggest issues of a rewrite. That whole feature parity thing and all that. Like, let's just replicate exactly what we had in a new language or whatever. So I think that's one of the things I see a lot of.
Yeah, and you'll see that especially when people have like automatic tools to do it for them. They're like, oh, it's okay. We have this tool that's going to run through all our components and do the thing for us. And it's like, what are you gaining then? Like, if you're just going to make the same mistakes that have led you down this path to this horrible confusion that is stopping features from going out at a good pace, what are you gaining by this rewrite? So yeah, I 100% agree. Another problem I see is people, and this is why people will usually rail against it. And I don't think it's a realistic thing, but it's stopping development. Like, okay, we're gonna stop feature development for 3 months. We're gonna do the big rewrite, and then when it's done in 3 months, which never will, by the way, when it's done in 3 months, then we'll start feature developing again. It's like, no, you gotta realize that this is an ongoing process. It's part of the stuff, but you still got to keep bringing stuff in. You still got to try and build stuff for sales. You might need to hire more people on, but of course, everybody you add is just more technical problems because you have to like bring those people up to speed and do stuff. But maybe you hire experts in what you're rewriting too, whatever, blah blah blah.
I was just going to say, I think another thing with that too is that a lot of the times the original requirements of that system that you're working on, the people that came up with that or knew that problem domain very well are usually no longer around or have moved up and out of that space. So the ones that I've found that are doomed to fail are the ones that are always looking to do it exactly the same way because nobody knows exactly what it's doing and how it's doing it because that domain knowledge has passed on. And I think the ones that I have seen work on a greenfield rewrite are more those ones where we're going to look at the problems we need to fix and we're going to reimagine the solution because then they understand what is it that we actually need to do and then let's just rebuild the system that does it.
And there's a side effect of reflecting on why you do certain things too, because if nobody in the company is left over who can tell you, well, why did we do it that way? And the answer is just, well, it works, don't touch it. That's really bad. Do you know what I mean? If there's no, whether it's documentation or just a person who gets it or, expertise in the area, if there's nobody to say, well, we have to do it that way because, then that's a problem that the rewrite can kind of come in and solve. A thing I find that often is the biggest, I think, reason for failure is there's kind of two methods to the rewrite. There is the bottom up or the top down, and then you're like, well, what do you mean? And it's a little more apparent, I guess, in web development because there's this very clear like tree almost of stuff. It's usually a tree of like, oh, component tree in the front end or something, or a tree of like, here's where the entry of the user is, and then here's the API dependencies it takes, and then they call different subservices, whatever. And you can usually see it as like, oh yeah, there's a starting point, kind of dependencies spread out, and then okay, and then we get our thing. And people think it's a good idea to do leaf up. So you're like, oh, well, we'll do this leaf, we'll do this leaf, we'll do this, and eventually we'll consume the whole app and it'll be great. I think that's the biggest failure because what happens generally is you start doing it, like, oh yeah, it's great, the enthusiasm's there, but the hard stuff starts getting pushed up because it's like, well, we can't rewrite this whole thing, so I'll just do this leaf and I'll just push that up, and that's kind of the refactoring. So the harder stuff kind of gets harder pushed up, and the enthusiasm for this rewrite starts to die as it gets to the point where it's like, well, people leave the company, whoever was pushing for it in the first place kind of takes off, and it's like, yeah, this just keeps getting pushed up, and then you get this really hard part that nobody wants to like tackle because it'll be a big deal. And that's when things start to die. And it's like, well, we've been living with this rewrite for like, we're halfway between for the last few years. That's kind of the problem. The other way around, I found is much more successful. And that's much harder at the beginning. But at the beginning is where all the enthusiasm is. But you kind of like go, okay, if we were to somehow make it so that we could wrap our new app and then insert our old app into it. And it's like, oh, well, how do you do that? And it's hard, and you got to figure it out. And there's various patterns, various different things that you can do. But if you create a new app and then slot your old app into it, then you start doing these like parallel slices. Like, okay, we have this one feature that goes all the way here. Maybe it's the website. Maybe it's like, if you're doing like micro front ends or something, there's things, you do that whole thing in like one big, like, okay, we push, yay, we got it done. You can now do this all the way from this, whatever it is, purchase, all the way to, it getting sold and put in the database. Boom, that's done, and it's all in the new app. And then you do that again. You figure out a vertical slice that you can do, and you do this whole vertical slice all the way from you're like, oh, hey, we've done everything, and now everything in this little, feature, whatever it is the new app now. And by doing that, the app actually gets easier and easier to do the rewrite as you move on, as opposed to the other way where it gets harder and harder, usually because people start pushing the complexity up. You have to sort of deal with the complexity up front, and then it gets easier and easier until you've got these last few strands, and then get rid of those. Everyone celebrates, and you move on. And that's the only way I've found the rewrite be successful, is figuring out that really hard stuff up front while the enthusiasm is there.
Yeah, and it it almost has to be completely that way too, where you're taking those whole vertical slices, because if you end up with some kind of hybrid where, oh yeah, we've wrapped the old application so that we can start using the strangle pattern to strangle out features and pull these vertical slices through as new system components, but they leave that back end piece as, but we'll just call the old system to get like our data. That whole data layer is still just all going to be the responsibility of that old system in the back end. And so you get, like this weird kind of new shiny finish on the outside, but the interior of it is still, tore up and ratted out, and so it looks good on the outside, but the inside is still the same kind of junk that you had before. And then it's kind of that leaf, it leans towards that leaf pattern that you're talking about, where then those things that are touching that legacy system and going all the way through, it's like, well, now we can't really rewrite this because it's become a dependency of our new system. We've integrated tightly to it. So because we had to, because it wasn't written to be flexible, and then it just kind of lives on as this blob at the center of your shiny candy coating.
Yeah, and you're definitely going to lead to the it works, don't touch it then,
Yep,
because nobody's going to go do that later. It's going to become this thing that drags on, and like nobody tackles it. It's like, oh, that's in the way. We call it technical debt. It's just we'll do it someday in the future, and then it will never get done.
yep.
So yeah, I agree with that 100%. Another thing that people will often lack doing when they do a big rewrite too is preparing for the rewrite, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do in your current system to be like, well, okay, what are we thinking? How are we going to tackle this new rewrite? What's the optimal that we're going for? And then let's try and refactor what we currently have to somewhat like that, at least. Like we may not be able to get too far, but if we just start breaking off, well, we know this is going to be a component now and this is going to be a component now, but it's all mashed together currently. Maybe separate that before you start the rewrite. Maybe make that part of the like, hey, we're going to, before we actually start changing languages or changing frameworks or whatever it is, let's just do that because we know it's better anyway. And then let's do some other part, figure out, oh, well, this piece, maybe we leave that alone. So we're just going to break that off, that kind of stuff. Figure it out and do some refactoring and preparing for the rewrite, because then it's way easier. You're not like trying to fit as much into this system. You're like, oh, we've already got these nice lines that we can sort of hit when we're doing this rewrite, and then we can sort of plan accordingly.
And depending on how old the system is, if it wasn't developed with good practices in the beginning, and this is something I used to call code rescue. Um, kind of from that perspective of like a first responder, you're going in to put out this fire that's in the belly of this code. And one of the first things that any first responder or the EV2, like in first aid, type of thing, is like, assess your environment and don't become another victim, right? And that was kind of one of those things. Like, if you're going to touch this code, you need to make sure that the code you're writing isn't as bad as the code that you're trying to fix. So, you put in these safety barriers of testing and make sure you understand what it is that piece of code is doing via tests, so that you have that safety net, that structure, that lifeline that you can give a tug on to say, no, okay, yeah, that didn't work because my tests don't pass anymore. And those were the kind of techniques that we would use to go in to make sure that we could break this out safely and start doing those. Okay, let's refactor this. Let's not do a singleton pattern inside a spring, because it's double it's double duty. Um, you don't need it, so we start refactoring that out. But oh, this is coupled to this other class that's also done as a singleton, is in a static space, and blah blah blah. And you try and unmesh it, and sometimes you have to go back and restart 3 or 4 times to try to untangle the spaghetti mess that's in there. And sometimes you're like, I've spent 2 weeks on this, and I am no closer to being done than I was before. I'm going to leave the test in place and let the building burn right here. This is beyond
That's actually
repair.
another good point you brought up that I kind of forgot about. But one problem again that people often have is they'll be like, well, we actually have good test coverage on this one, so we can use that as we rebuild this whole thing, rewrite it in the new, you know. And it's like, well, maybe rethink that, because often, at least in my experience, and this might be completely anecdotal, but often I'll find that the tests are bad. And the tests are usually doing things like testing implementation. The tests are assuming a certain breakdown. So I almost find it's better to be like, yeah, I know we have tests, but I'm going to start really high level, whatever your closest to end to end or integration is, like these really high level. I want to see it do this. It's going to keep doing that. That's all I'm going to worry about. Few high level tests, and then start breaking in. And if, now we've wrecked all the other tests, delete them or skip them or whatever you need to do to keep moving this on, and then add more tests, add tests to your code that you've rewritten now, the new code, the new whatever, and kind of go from top down with the tests to like out, going from high level to like your unit tests, rather than like, oh, we've got our unit tests and we're writing out. Kind of do the reverse when you're doing the rewrite, because yeah, often, like I said, you're going to get mired down in trying to make these old tests pass, and I don't think that's a good way to actually get it done. And I would even say, if you can, and depending on what industry you're working in and depending on what you're working on, but if you can, don't worry about the tests too much at first. Like if you can get away with like, yeah, we've got some, tests to make sure that it's not broken, but it's okay if we ship a little bug here and there that we can fix quickly. That's great, because then you don't have to like, and some industries can't do that, but that's great, because then you can sort of like, we're just gonna like turn off swaths of tests as we kind of break this down. And then once it's done, once the rewrite's done, we can have another task to like, okay, let's really get the test coverage back up. That's just a better way of getting it done. It has little to do with safety and more to do with just the momentum, that you don't want to lose that early momentum of a big rewrite.
Yeah, one of the other prep things that I've sorry, Aaron. One of the other prep things I found when you're getting ready to do a rewrite is a lot of those older systems, they really have no idea what's being used at all. So when you are having to decide what features do we want to keep, what do we want to throw away, inserting some sort of usability, observability into the system to understand like what is actually going on here, what features are people using, what are people doing with this system today, how are they using it today, trying to get some of that in place and get some data to help you guide like, well, I think we should keep this, like let's figure it out, let's understand what these people are actually doing with this current system. And yes, I did pick up on some of your Canadian roots there, Adam. You said figure it out earlier. You said figure it out. I'm a nice.
What's that all about?
What's that?
At least he's not saying process.
Process.
Process, It's the process,
Yeah. Get your process.
I do want to come back to something that
sorry about being Canadian.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sorry
about it. I do want to go back to something you said, but I thought was interesting, and it kind of, I was listening to you all talk somewhat, and then my mind went off on a tangent. I'm sitting here thinking about it. Like you mentioned about like you're basically like taking advantage of the enthusiasm early on the rewrite, and like doing the process. What might, like if an engineer were looking at it and saying, well, obviously you need to do it this way and build it from the bottom up, right? That might be the logical, technological best way to do it, or engineering best way to do it. But you're taking the human side, and that's an interesting thing that I think the industry has embraced maybe over the last 10, 15 years or something. I'm thinking of like Conway's law and principles like that. But we're actually thinking of the human part of software engineering, and not just what is the absolute best technical approach. Because we've realized that you have to take that. There are humans involved here, and we have to think about that and consider that. So I thought that was just an interesting thing. It made my mind go on a little tangent. So thanks for that. So you've opened up a door in my brain that now I'm going to have to walk into and look around a little while. So thank you.
And that kind of leads to the point that I was going to make as well, is that it's not about the technology, and the kind of tests that you want to be writing for these kinds of things are what is the value that this system is currently providing? Because when you are doing a rewrite, you are replacing something that is currently doing a function in production to some level of adequacy, right? And you cannot lose that. You can't go backwards to go forwards a lot of times. And so you have to have those things in place to go, okay, what value is the system actually providing? And you almost have to value drive it from okay, this is something of value we get from the system, and let's take that value story and let's have a test for that. Can like an acceptance test type of thinking of this is when we supply A and B, we get C out of this. And whatever the implementation is, who cares, right? I just need to make sure when I supply A and B, I get C out so that I am getting the same value that I got out of the system yesterday.
Yeah. And often a rewrite will come with a redesign too. They'll just be like, hey, let's do it both together. And so you should be doing things that like your normal UX patterns. You should be doing things like, hey, we're going to user test stuff. We're going to like actually make sure that this is improving our conversions, whatever you're doing, whatever you're measuring, rather than like getting rid of it. That's one thing we had talked about before the show, but is just like for some reason, and this is totally maybe a switch of topic, but for some reason, it's like UX doesn't matter when it comes to coders or something. It's this strange thing that we run into where not that the UX doesn't matter in the product, like oh yeah, the product we're building, but more like the tools the developers are using. It's like oh well, they're developers, they can figure it out. It's like well, is that right? Like there's a strong lack of user experience fundamentals in coding tools, in development tools. And I don't understand why. And it feels like it just comes from this legacy of like, oh, well, they're technical people, they'll figure it out. But that's never good enough. You know what I mean? Like there is in web development right now, there's kind of like these major frameworks. There's like React and Angular, Svelte. And I find only one of them, Svelte, I feel like kind of takes the like user experience approach. It's like, well, how are developers going to use this? And then they kind of figure it out rather than what can we do? Okay, now let's expose what we can do to everybody. And it's this mindset change that I think is desperately needed in the industry. Like if you look at any tutorial that I see these like web development tutorials, they start with like, okay, well, let's make the database schemas. Let's figure out what we're going to need. And then we're going to layer on an API and then we'll put a front end on that API. And I'm always like, no, don't do that. Do the other way. Like figure out what the user can do, move into like what minimal APIs you need, and then what storage you need. So the whole industry is kind of pervasive with this, like, oh, technical as people can figure it out. It's fine. And I don't like that at all. It's it's strange to me. And I feel like we're about to hit this big moment, I think, in web tools because there's right now it's actually pretty awful. In web development, the more popular you are, the better people just assume you are. There's this thing like, oh, you need a logo, you need a cool website, you need to have a backing company. It's like, no, it's kind of moved away from the, hey, what's the technically best solution? And just to be like, well, what's more popular? Because there's quite a few examples actually of like stuff that is just objectively better than other stuff, but it isn't used because the popular one is still around, which, you could debate. Well, it's whether it's popular actually does matter. And you could debate that. But I feel like it's primed now for like, hey, what tools are just going to be the easiest to use, but also give you the best experience? Because there's always the problem is like, well, easy doesn't mean simple. And there's a whole difference between that. And you want to have the flexibility and the control, but you also want to have things, quick and easy to do. And it's as if there's a dichotomy there, but I don't think there actually is. I think there's like, yeah, you could have both and somebody just needs to design it. What we need is designers to come and design our code and our tools. That's what we need.
Yeah, and
Take
I've and
that
I've
UX
seen
mindset even.
I've seen some tools that actually took a very interesting and easier approach to applying complex logic um, for solutioning in a couple different industries. One of them was when I was looking at teaching my kids to program because, hey, do what dad does. And there's this language out there called Scratch um, that uses like block formations for control structures and loops and things like that. I'm like, this is brilliant because we type this in time and time and time over again as we're developing solutions, and they're the base building blocks of what a program is. Why isn't it just slapped together with blocks like that and make it simple? And also, then when I was working with chip testing software, their their testing structures were also one of the interfaces. And I don't remember which one it was, but one of them also had like testing nodes that were drag and drop and organize, and you plugged in different attributes into the blocks, but so you could see your testing path on a display. And I'm like, these are really cool and really easy to understand, instead of looking at a series of just text and numbers on a screen and trying to figuring out what is this doing. And I thought that was really interesting um, approaches to the problem of, we have a very complex structure, but we put a nice UI in front of it so that you can basically GUI edit your programs and your streams and your thought consciousness. And
Yeah.
it was a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it just seems to have died away.
Yeah, well, I think the developer knee-jerk reaction might be what, I could call the Dreamweaver effect, where they're like, oh, well, if it's got a nice UI and it's drag and drop, I won't have the control I need. And it's like, I'll have to, whatever. It's just easier for me to write code. And I feel like this is where designers need to come in, because there's this like very fundamental design position, right? Where it's like, yeah, you make the 80% that they're going to do upfront and easy. And then when they need to get into that 20% that is not the upfront and easy stuff that we know they're going to need, okay, you allow them to do it. But it's a little bit harder. It's a little bit deeper. They need to go a little bit further. They need to maybe open stuff. And that's it. That's all you need. So all these like drag and drop tools, absolutely. People are like, oh, they have this. Oh, I remember all these GUI tools that won't let me do what I need to do. And I'm just fighting the tools all the time. But if we had more user testing, essentially, like, when was the last time you ever heard like a technology for developers being user tested? Like, oh, we sent this out to 100 developers, here's the feedback we got. Like, it just doesn't happen. Maybe it does, but I haven't heard of it. But you could get into that, like, oh yes, well, this was great up till this point. Oh, well, maybe if we added, the ability to just hop this open and write your own code for these particular parts, well, that would be perfect. You know what I mean? Like, it's just these such easy wins, I think, that we could get to drastically improve productivity for developers. And meanwhile, we're focusing on ChatGPT, which I don't think is a good a good productivity boost. Like, there's a lot of stuff with these ChatGPT things happening right now where it's like, oh yeah, but I just type what I want and it like codes for me. But it never really does. And like, I feel like most senior developers are like, yeah, but then I spend just as much time debugging what ChatGPT wrote like than I would have if I had just written it myself. So I feel like there's like, again, let's user test that. Let's see how they're doing. And maybe, GitHub or whoever put out Copilot, maybe they did. Maybe they tried it for a while, but I'm not sure they did. I feel like people just think, hey, there's this cool thing. I'm sure developers will use it because it's cool and it does stuff. I just want to see more fundamentals of design being brought into the whole development tooling. So
Yeah, I think trusting your programs to AI is folly, like you said. Um, but you could use it to say, what kind of test should I have for this piece of code? Or if you get stuck in a piece of code, it's like, what is this code doing? And kind of that is like a research partner type of thing. It's very good at analysis of data, right? Because that's what it's designed to do: analyze data and come out and produce an outcome from it. So, using it as like a research assistant in your development process, I think is a really good use of the tool. But yeah, I would not trust AI to write my code with some of the things I've seen. You know, Especially if you've looked at any of the AI generated pictures that have an extra arm coming out of the head or whatever.
yeah, nobody wants code that, like, I don't know, sometimes it fails, but we don't really know why, so we just ignore those ones. Like, yeah,
we
predictability is
just we
fairly
just
important when it
regenerate
comes
those.
to code. Yeah, we just don't worry about that. That's fine. Just hit refresh. Um, uh, what was I going to say about that? Yeah, and you're right. There is good ways. Definitely research. Definitely like, oh, hey, I want to learn something. But also that's kind of weird too, right? Because it's reliant on like sort of knowing if it's going to lie to you, because as maybe we don't know, but yeah, Chat GPT stuff, all these LLMs, they lie to you sometimes because they're just trying to guess the best text they think you want from your input. And it's like, yeah, so you kind of have to have this base knowledge of, oh yeah, no, that's wrong. Like, oh yeah, whatever they just said there, that's actually a complete fabrication. Don't listen to that. And so it's a weird double-edged sword when you use it for like learning and research.
Yeah. And now I'm having to like scratch my idea of always generating all my applications from a database schema. Dang it. Yeah, I thought that was a great way to do it. You guys just talked me out of it.
That's one thing I wonder if it would be amazing though. Is these LLMs is just and I know there's quite a few products actually right now, but just being able to say, I have this giant data set, across data lakes and data things, and I want this, and just being able to say it in plain English, and then it figures out how to query all that for you. That would be a pretty amazing tool that I could actually see. Oh, LLMs would be good for that, because it'd just be able to figure out, I want to see a graph that has this compared to this, and give me a table so that I can run the numbers differently if I want. And it could do that. I'd be like, well, that's how we do all interfaces for graphing data now, just all of them, because that's amazing. Let the analysts just ask for what they want directly.
Yeah, and I think
I've
you could
been
probably
seeing
get
use cases for
away.
that.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I think you could probably get away with that in a relational or graph database. I don't think you could do it with a NoSQL database though.
Well, I couldn't, but maybe a robot could.
Mm.
I just don't
Well, I've been
know if
trying to figure
it
out
would
what
have enough
is.
information.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, what is that even called? Because we've heard a lot of use cases from clients that, basically saying like, we spend a lot of time when one of our people wants to understand stuff about data. We bring in either a DBA or somebody to write me a new report to answer that question. Every single time we have to have somebody go write a brand new report. Whereas if I had ChatGPT, that I could use that, but it's not. I don't think it's retrieval augmented generation RAG, right? It's almost like the reverse of that. It's like generation augmented retrieval. You're saying, hey,
Yeah.
you generator, figure out the query that I need to write that goes and gets me the things that I need to have. Like it's a flipping it on its
Yeah,
head.
Quickly
it's
pause
like
the
a
podcast.
reverse
Go
phone
write
lookup.
get your patent in there quick, because you gotta and get
Yeah,
that
right.
term out there. Write that blog
Yeah.
post. Get that term out there.
This
All ideas
podcast
for
brought to you by
penetrating the
gar.io.
Gar.
Gar.
That's just fun to say too.
We have a
Need more gar in
we
this.
have a Talk Like a Pirate Day sale going on.
That reminds me.
Gar.io.
Do you know what a pirate's favorite letter is?
I'm gonna guess R.
You might think it's R, which is a good guess, but his true love be the C.
Well played, sir. Well played. Hook, line, and sinker.
Emphasis on the hook.
Give him the hook.
Speaking of hooks, I thought, and I love really bad segues. Speaking of hooks, you talked about we got together before this episode, and we talked about what are some of the things we could talk about. You brought up a topic that I honestly had never heard of, and I was I've been doing this a long time, and I had not heard of it. Progressive enhancement. You kind of talked about that, and I kind of the in my brain's like, oh, you're just progressively making things better, which would be like iterative development. That's not exactly what it is. Can you maybe explain that a little bit better?
Yeah. So maybe this is very well. It shouldn't be, but maybe it's a very web development term. But like about 10 years ago, I feel like everyone was talking about progressive enhancement, and maybe the other side of this same coin would be like graceful degradation, where the idea is for whatever, and it's more important in web maybe than in other platforms, because it's no matter what device you're on, no matter what limitations you have, you're going to have this work for the main part. And so you make the most base thing that'll work on the most browsers, the most devices, that this will possibly just work. Then you say, okay, now we test for features, we test for what versions we were able to do or whatever, and we enhance. And so the idea is that if you're doing graceful degradation, the idea would be that we made it, but then we also put in some stuff to be like, oh, hey, make sure this works on older crap. And progressive enhancement is we make the thing that's going to work everywhere first, and then we start enhancing it to build it up to the thing we actually want on the latest browsers or the latest devices. And it's a huge thing that was around 10 years ago, a decade ago. Everyone was talking about, like, you couldn't put this out. And then I feel like the SPAs, the single page apps in web development, sort of took over, and this is where these frameworks like Angular and React were. And doing graceful degradation in that medium was, or sorry, not graceful degradation, doing progressive enhancement in that medium was very hard. And so the conversations just stopped because it's all in this like, oh, everything's done in your client. So if it doesn't work, well, it just doesn't work. Like, oh, you have an old browser, you get a white screen, or you get this, and there were weird justifications like, yeah, but who cares? You hear this a lot with like, oh, should it work without JavaScript on? And they're like, well, who turns off JavaScript? And then there's a lot of articles you can find about like, well, it's more than you think because it's people going through a train, it's people in certain situations, people out whatever. Often there's what they call Li-Fi, where you are connected, but for some reason it's not giving you all the files that your browser is requesting these things, and so you'll actually just have like one JavaScript file that didn't load, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things that can happen. So it's like, yeah, you should maybe worry about that. And there's a large enough percentage of users that this will be happening to that like, actually it's kind of a big deal. And then we have this like big swing from SPAs and everything happening on the client in web development to like the server again. Everything's moving back to the server. There's these things that like, always secular. It's like, oh, hey, we go server, we go client, we go server, we go client. There's other different things that kind of happen in development. But we're currently on this big swing to the server again. That's where the pendulum has gone. But I don't hear anybody really talking about progressive enhancement now. And I'm like, but why not? This was the thing that kind of stopped it, I felt, was like doing everything on the client. We're back on the server. We could be doing this. Why isn't everybody talking about it again? Because it's rather important, but I'm not hearing it. So did that explanation of progressive enhancement actually like play out? I kind of realized I babbled a lot there, but where it's not just like, oh, we make a feature and then we keep adding to the feature. It's literally about like, what are the devices this is going to run on capable of? And we try and make sure that the root of it, if it's content, okay, they can read the content at least. If it's videos, it's like, well, they might get a link to download the video if they can't play video on their device. If it's a, CSS stuff, like, well, worst case scenario, everything looks okay. It doesn't look right, but it's enough that they can function and they can like, submit a form and stuff happens the way they expect.
Is a good analogy maybe like, I know this isn't what you're talking about, but this help me frame my brain here. Like video players, if it notices that my bandwidth can support full HD or 4K, it will go ahead and upgrade your video experience to be the best experience that your certain situation, whether it is your machine or your internet provider or whatever, can provide. Is that the idea? Is kind of like, instead of dumbing down when you realize, oh, this user situation can't support the best of the best of the best, let me dumb down pieces of it. I'm smarting up instead of dumbing down or enhancing the experience.
I think that's exactly it. Because like the canonical real life example is like the escalator, where they say, oh, well, an escalator, when it's broken, hey, it's still stairs. But that's kind of more for graceful degradation in my mind. It's because but you built an escalator. You didn't build stairs and then make them move. You built an escalator. That's graceful degradation. But you're exactly right. What it is it's more about like, well, we built the thing first and then we started to enhance what it could do to get to where we wanted based on device features and what it can do. So yeah, your example is better than the canonical one.
We had to think a lot about this in tech ed when I worked in that space, because students came from all different kinds of universities, some that had really old infrastructures that couldn't support, video streaming. So we had to provide transcripts, and that was that graceful degradation part. But then on other ones, we actually were able to do some of this progressive enhancement, where not only did you get the text, but you had a read speaker on top of it. And it was, the original intent of that was for accessibility, because not everybody, for the visually impaired, the reading experience isn't that great. But it turns out other students were using it because it was great. I can put on my headphones and just have it read it to me. It's story time for my homework. And we're like, oh, yeah, that works out really well. And now it's kind of like a staple feature because of the fact that it's like, this is one of those progressive enhancements. Not only do you get the text, if it's available, you can have it read to you as well. And the next thing is going to be, AI will draw you a TV show out of it, type of thing. you know, but
AI
yeah,
mentioned. Well done.
yep.
Well, and yeah, Aaron, you bring up an interesting. So could one of the reasons, and I don't know that it necessarily plays into or comes into play in general, but in our case, because Aaron and I worked together at Cengage Learning, and we were in ed tech. Um, one of the aspects was you had to be very careful not to give one student an unfair advantage when it comes to assessments, because they're kind of competing for grades. They could be grading on a curve. You can't give one student an unfair advantage by giving them a better experience that makes it more easy for them to learn. So you had to be really careful of doing those sort of things where you're enhancing that experience for one user because they've got a faster computer versus the other where they do not. I don't know if that specific aspect comes into play in the general sense, or what do you think? Maybe on that progressive, is that maybe some of the reason why people didn't do it?
No, I. And
I
the
don't
reason I
know.
would say that, the reason I would say that is that the people who aren't doing progressive enhancement aren't also doing like lowest common denominator. They're not doing like, hey, this will work for everybody. They're doing stuff that will absolutely break for people on less devices. So it would be even worse than the situation there where, yeah, some students you can actually like do your tests and do your learning online. Oh, but you with your older phone, no, you can't at all. You'll just have to figure it out. Go borrow one from a friend, or get a job and come back when you have money. That kind of thing. Like it's just such a it's a way worse problem, I think. If
I'm giving too much credit
going
is
lowest
what
common
you're saying.
denominator, yeah, going to the lowest common denominator, it'd be like, oh well, you don't have to do that. You could progressively enhance. But no, what's actually happening, I think, more often is like, no, it just completely breaks.
Yeah, it's like
So they're
trying
just
to pull
taking
out an
I
old
don't give a
iPad.
darn.
Yeah, it's like trying to pull out an
Gotcha.
old iPad and installing a new app on it. Like, no, you can't do that on this.
Yeah,
This is
just says
this
no.
is yeah. This is you might as well use that as a paperweight right now because we're not going to run anything on that anymore.
And like right now with web development, there's React server components is a big thing, and Svelte has this like streaming and whatever. It's like we're primed to do this now. We can actually have these great experiences. Except React server components, the most popular thing in web development right now, I think that people are talking about, and people or whatever, needs client side JavaScript to work. And I know that sounds weird because like, but doesn't it run on the server? Yeah, it does. But to compare, if it, not to get too technical, but to differentiate it from just like server side rendering, which is one thing, but these components, one of the main things is that you can stream updates, but those streaming updates will not work without client side JavaScript. Therefore, you cannot do progressive enhancement. Therefore, what's the point? Not what's the point, but why isn't this prioritized? Might be a better way to say that.
Yeah, it's interesting how that pendulum swung, right? So, you remember back in the old green screen days, right? It was the machine itself was doing all and then we just had dumb terminals, right? And then it was like, well, forget that. That's not a good experience. Well, we need fat clients, right? And we started writing all these desktop apps. And then it was like, oh, no. We need to put everything back on the server and let server side render and just spit out HTML. And that worked for a while. And then it went all server side, single page app and all Ajax and all of that fun stuff. It's so funny how that just goes back and forth. And now we're back emphasizing server side rendering again. So I can't wait for the next iteration of the smart front end that we embrace.
You can almost feel like I think we may be at the apex of the server side. You can almost feel it swinging back now too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. Though one would say maybe we're not really swinging back and forth as much as kind of like moving in a spiral forward. It's like, yeah, but things are still getting better all the time. We do go like this way and that way, but things are still always getting better. Like it's better than it was no matter what. So yeah, it's like a weird spiral. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the solar system moving through space thing. It's like the solar system doesn't move through space in a flat plane. It moves through space like a big spiraling thing rushing towards something. So yeah, same idea.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Maybe Mac OS is better than Vax. Maybe, right? Like maybe that's true. My old Vax screen. Yeah. All right. So we have a new segment that we'd like to debut this episode, and we there's all these like, are you gonna do you like this or not kind of things. There's plenty of them that the kids would say pass or smash kind of thing, right? So we did an IT or technology take on it. We call it ship or skip, and We can insert the ship or skip jingle right here if we ever come up with it. I don't know.
Ship or skip, everybody, we got to tell us if you ship or skip.
And that should be our first ship it or skip it topic.
I love it. I would just ship it as is.
Yeah. I agree. Ship it. So
anyway, the idea is I like this or I don't like this. We have a few that we've kind of jotted down. I'll let you, Aaron, do you want to start and we'll just kind of work through the list back and forth, kind of ping pong it?
Sure. Let's start with TypeScript.
Oh, ship it. Ship it. And here's the thing. I get why people don't like TypeScript. I understand it. It's added complexity to a beautifully simple language that's completely whatever. But the difference is when you're working as a team and you have at least a few people who really know TypeScript well, because I'll admit, when you have a bunch of people who are new to TypeScript trying to do TypeScript, it can feel awful. When you have a few people who really know what they're doing to guide the others, it can save you from a lot of problems, like a lot of problems with, oh, I can't believe this bug happened. Oh, I can't believe, we never caught this before. It's so weird. Why are we doing this same data and reproducing it a bunch of times? Blah, blah, blah. You'll find all these sort of things. So I'm absolutely a TypeScript, ship it. And I do feel like it's taken over like JavaScript. I think there's probably more TypeScript projects than there are JavaScript projects when it comes to like commercial products, at least.
What about you, Aaron?
I am a fan of the write it once and use it everywhere philosophy. That was like kind of the basis for TypeScript, and I believe in enhancing TypeScript to cover the edge cases that where maybe it didn't handle something natively. Instead of going, oh well, it doesn't do this, so I'm just gonna write this native over here and then write this native over there. Because we don't live in a single platform world, and that portability I think is worth it. So I'm a ship it for TypeScript.
Yeah, and I mean from that point of view, I want to step back and say like absolutely ship it, because I was just having this discussion yesterday with a bunch of people. TypeScript and JavaScript, I guess, and TypeScript, therefore, is one of those weird things where you can do anything. You can do everything. You can do AI stuff. You can do device, embedded in device stuff. You can do robots. You can do everything. You may not be the most like performant. So, when you've got, we're going to parse through this 2 gig file, whatever, maybe it's not the right choice every time, but you can do everything with it. So from that point of view, absolutely ship it.
I'm ship it on this one as well, and I mean this comes from a Java guy, so no surprise, right? But I think it's the thing that people lose sight of, honestly, when it comes to development, is everybody tries to optimize for like, how can I write the smallest number of characters? We're trying to optimize for the right scenario as opposed to the maintain scenario. And for me, TypeScript, yes, absolutely, it is a beautiful language. I would agree. I love TypeScript as a language. However, if production is down, it's 4 a.m, I haven't had any coffee, my CTO's yelling at me, I'm in trouble unless I get, we're losing millions of dollars in sales unless I get this code back up and running, and I open up TypeScript or open up JavaScript versus TypeScript, I think I can more quickly reorient myself in a TypeScript environment than I could in a JavaScript. That's how I think of it in myself. I think people try to emphasize too much on the right side of software engineering, WRITE, right side of software engineering, as opposed to the enhancement and maintenance side, because you maintain software much, much more than you initially write it. And I'll shut up now. All right, so let's go ship or skip design systems.
Should I go first again?
Sure.
All right. Absolutely ship. Especially when we consider like the design system isn't just like, your component library or whatever it's going to be. Your design system is the language and the concepts that you're going to use, where the designers and the programmers both can come together and be like, oh, we understand what this means. We're going to have this, domain language to understand that, oh, this is this, and our, whatever it is. It's not just about colors and branding and whatever. It's about how do we communicate with each other better. And I think it's all for design systems.
I don't know that I have much more to add. I like the idea of design systems myself, so I'm ship it. What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm shipping. I've actually taken the idea of design systems into like requirements gathering and stuff like that to use some of the same kind of concepts of visualizing and storytelling in order to define requirements to a development team so that they understand why they're doing what they're doing and not just what they're doing. So yeah,
Yeah, the only
shipped
time
it for me.
I've run into, yeah, the only time I've run into where there's, I would couch my statement with something. So I have seen scenarios where we've tried to come up with like a standard set of components, right, that everyone should be using for everything. That's usually design systems usually involve. Here's the canonical component library. If when there are new use cases, they kind of like try to shoehorn every little case into the common component libraries, and it becomes just this like maintenance nightmare because there's all these ifs. There's the switches that you add. I'm thinking back to like, back in the ed tech days, right? There's always these question types that we would have to support from a assessment perspective. But they would try to like put all these little one-off little scenarios like, oh, I'd really like the answers to read sideways instead of up up and down, right? And so you'd have to have all these little if statements, and the code just became just ugly over time. There's all these, like, it becomes a combinatorics explosion of options that you could have, and there's no way to test everything and all this. So that would be the only thing I'd say to be careful of. It's usually easier to just copy something and use it and adapt it, as opposed to trying to cram everything into that your kind of your canonical or your common library. All right, next one, Ron.
So this next one is Jamstack. Is this a stack of like different flavored jams?
Let
What is
me talk
Jamstack?
about Jamstack. Sweet. So, I will say, as a huge Jamstack proponent, I will absolutely say skip it. And the reason is this: Jamstack is dead. So, to get into what Jamstack was, well, okay, actually, so Jamstack is kind of funny because you have to face facts. Jamstack ended up changing over time because it was an idea. They didn't want to acknowledge the idea. It had to change, and eventually it died. And honestly, I think I got an email a couple months ago from like the person who had like been pushing Jamstack and the company Netlify that had been like trying to like get that word into everybody's lexicon or whatever. And it was like, yeah, so we're not going to do Jamstack anymore. We're not going to call it Jamstack. Jamstack is officially dead. So Jamstack, what it was static sites got a bad name a long time ago, but it was a pretty cool way to make applications. You could do, this is the single page app era, where you could do, hey, I'm going to like put everything on the client. These are the thick clients, and I'm going to call different APIs. So it's going to be JavaScript, APIs, and markup. Jam, JAM, JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And that's what we're going to ship. And it's like, well, isn't that just static? But they didn't like the word static. And the reason they didn't like the word static is because people would be like, static, well, ours does a bunch of stuff dynamic. We can't do a static app. That doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, it's not static. Just the assets are static. Just the like literal files don't change. That's the only part. We just don't have to have like a runtime running. And it's like, no, we can't do that. It's static. We do lots of cool. So they tried, these companies in particular, there were a few of them, tried to like rebrand that. Like, hey, this isn't static. This is Jamstack. JavaScript, API, markup. Cool. Jamstack and full client apps aren't unreasonable. This is how apps work. Like native apps work on your iPhone and your Android is full client. It's all on your device right now. That's how it works. You download it to your device. It runs in your device. It can save things in your device. It can do things in your device. And it doesn't necessarily have to go to a server, but it can go to a server when it needs to. It uses APIs to do that. That's a really common architecture, or whatever you want to call it, for apps. Jamstack was just that, except with one thing, because it was all browser-based technologies. Browsers don't have the ability to do any sort of like safe saving, so any sort of cryptographic like storage. And so without that, everything has to like, oh, well, you can do a certain amount on the client, but then you always have to kind of fall back to these APIs. You always have to end up doing something. And then it was like, okay, well, you got to this point where, the browsers have this very unique problem where the size of the files that you're downloading actually affects the performance, because it has to load them first and then execute them. And the execution actually is dependent on the size too, just by the way JavaScript works. And so bigger apps start to be a problem. And it has this weird connotation thing, because you expect to go to a website, it downloads very fast, and I can immediately start using the app, as opposed to like an app, which you go to the app store, you hit install, it takes 20 seconds to download, you're fine with that, and you open up the app and you start using it. That would be fine if that's how web works. But if you open up a website and 20 seconds go by and nothing's happening, you just go, and you go away because it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
So Jamstack had these two main problems. Couldn't store stuff safely. Loading had to be taken into account. And there's all these kind of things. And eventually people started going, hey, if you server-side render stuff, then it works better. You get better performance off the hop, at least. And it was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, and because you have to do all your crypto storage kind of stuff on the server anyway, we can just do it closer to there. And this is where the server movement started to, like, the pendulum swing back to that. And it was like, okay, well, let's rename what Jamstack means. And they literally, like, again, the same company, Netlify, sent out an email. I think it was Netlify. They had sort of separated themselves, and Jamstack had its own website and stuff too. So maybe it wasn't particularly them, but it was the idea. They sent out this email saying, okay, Jamstack means this now. It means composable. And they literally said, like, it doesn't mean JavaScript APIs and markup anymore. It's just its own thing called Jam. So, and it was like, okay. And here's what it means. It means composable software development, where you, like, bring things together, this API from this service, this API from this company, this API, and you compose your application together from various services. And it was like, great. Isn't that what everybody's doing? It's like, so what does the term mean anymore? Like, it's like, yes, I get that. And as it kind of went on, it was like, yeah, okay, Jamstack started to die. You started to see less conference talks about Jamstack. And then, like I said, I think the killer in the coffin for me was the nail in the coffin, was the email that says, hey, just so you know, officially, Jamstack is dead. We're not sending out a newsletter anymore, and the website's going to go down eventually. Saying, okay, Jamstack, skip it. That was a really long skip it. Sorry. Skip it,
though. That's good.
All right.
I like
so with that description, I would definitely say skip it. I think that a lot of that, for one, the security concerns are just, especially since security is taking, like, a main spotlight on many, many, many sites. Having those kind of concerns in a back end for front end type of layer is definitely where you want to have that. You can also get caching there to reduce load times. So, and I always like doing my data consolidation behind the scenes and on a very small, close to front end type server piece, especially in cloud environments. I say skip it.
Let's see. How do I say? I would say ship it in certain cases, right? So there are. I don't know that server-side rendering is necessarily the answer for everything. Like, I don't want the pendulum shouldn't swing all the way, like all or nothing. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think there's certain experiences where the concepts, now maybe the term and that whole environment and the movement is dead, of course, right? But yes, but I still think using JavaScript in the browser, calling APIs, and using markup to display things to users, that concept is solid, right? The essence of what they were saying. So I think it's ship it, and with certain scenarios. Yeah,
put that asterisk on it for certain.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing, because back in the day, the static sites did have their place to even just for, like, content, like when you were just doing content. But I feel like the use cases where this would be useful, because I was trying to think of one. It's like, what would be a use case where I wouldn't have security concerns, or I would want the data to be obvious, my my rendered version of the data to be a layer away from what the API is giving me, so that I have that, oh, they changed their version of the API, I can update my mappings. And I couldn't think of one off the top of my head. So that's what led me to skip it, because I don't think we're in that space where there isn't security concerns or some type of data conglomerate happening between APIs anymore. We're not doing like static HTML type pages this day and
Yeah,
age.
and like there is actually I would call it a fork maybe of Jamstack, or like a more refined thing, that the movement that's happening right now, which is just local first. And local first is very similar in the idea is that you download the files to your device, and that's where it does all the work, and that's where your data stays unless you choose to sync it somewhere else. And it's about syncing to, it's like, this is my data, I sync it to where I choose, blah blah blah. But it's a local app first, and I think local app is kind of where local first, sorry, is kind of where Jamstack went. And I think if you had to name the movement, rename it again, that'd be what I would say Jamstack morphed into, the local first, essentially. But there's a lot more philosophy of why and privacy and blah 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 about local first too, that maybe wasn't related to Jamstack at all. But I'd say that's kind of what happened with Jamstack.
I'd like to.
All right.
So we had another one on the docket, but I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I think we're gonna skip that one because I really want to
You're
get
going
to
to
the
skip
last
it.
one.
You're not going to ship it. You're going to skip. Yeah,
I
you're going to
am
skip.
gonna skip it. I see what I did there.
Yeah.
The last
Well,
one that
sometimes
we have.
people are multifaceted. We want to understand more than just technology about people. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
like where you're
exactly.
going
And
there,
this
Aaron.
in this next one is more about people and understanding people. Breakdancing as an Olympic sport. Ship it or skip it.
I'm gonna let you guys go first. I got a long answer again.
James, why don't you kick us off on this one? Breakdancing as an Olympic sport.
I say ship it, and again, I'd like to put an asterisk by what I'm saying here. Don't let Raygun do it ever again. That was that person that everybody's making fun of. That poor person. I mean, they whatever. But I say ship it because I remember as a kid. I'm old. Okay, I'll be 50 this year. I actually went to like breakdancing classes like there is some physicality to that. You know what I mean? Like it is a hard thing. So I think if there are going to be things in the Olympics there are much more trivial things in the Olympics that don't show athleticism than breakdancing. I think breakdancing can qualify as an Olympic sport. I just think the example we got in Paris this year was a little cringe.
Now, I'm on the fence. I'm going to say it needs work for, so I'm going to skip it with an asterisk. And my asterisk is
Mm.
that if you bring it back, you need to change the criteria by which it's judged and possibly the format. Um, so the whole dance battle aspect of it, I wasn't good with. Um, I'd rather see one performer doing their bit to a set song or whatever, and it being less subjective, because I thought there were some really good dancers that didn't get put through just because the other person, you know, were hitting check boxes on a list type of thing. Because I actually
Mm.
watched it in detail, because when I was learning to break, there were no breakdancing classes. We had to pull out the cardboard and kind of figure it out from what we saw somewhere. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, a lot of those, I do agree with the athleticism of it. Some of those moves are extremely hard to do, and if you matched up some of the moves that were done on the floor there to the men's gymnastic floor exercises, you will see a lot of those same moves
Mm.
being done. And so, from that aspect of the athleticism, I'm like, yes, ship that part of it. Absolutely. I enjoy having it done to music, because I was kind of asking myself, I was like, why does the women's gymnastics team get music to their floor routine and the guys don't? Or vice versa. It's like you're doing tumbling passes on the floor. Why are they different? And I also think that I'm getting off track a little bit, but I also think, why are the events different for women and men in gymnastics? Um, but uh, so for the breakdancing thing, I think I didn't like the judging format because I thought some of the better dancers didn't get put through. Like, I thought the French breakdancer. I can't remember his name, but I thought he was phenomenal, and he got taken out by somebody I didn't think was as had as good of a performance. And so I was just kind of how did that work? And as I was watching, it was like, oh, he checked off more boxes for the judges, and it wasn't judged the same way. So I think there should be it needs to be more like gymnastics, where it's a more of like a these are the things that get judged and how they do it. These are maybe like required elements that you have to put into your dance type of thing. It's more of maybe a routine that has to be done, and maybe a level of difficulty of your routine type of scenario. So for me right now, I'm gonna skip it with that asterisk of if you bring it back, it needs to be done better.
Well, all right. I got to admit, I didn't think we'd be taking this so seriously, but I'm going to take it just as seriously as you guys. So I'm going to say ship it with a tilde and a superscript ampersand, because I want to say I agree with everything you said. As a sport, it needs to be, actually the same things are always being said about figure skating. It's like, well, how are they judging it? Where's the transparency in the judging? Blah, 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 blah. Same thing with that. So yeah, absolutely. And it's a new sport, hard to judge, hard for laymen to judge too. Hard to be like, well, why does that guy look so cool? Why is he losing to this other person that did not look so cool? Now, specifically with ray gun, I also sort of get a ship it, because I would say this is like one of those Rebecca Black, Monica Lewinsky kind of situations where this thing happened and she went out there and she wasn't trying to do anything. She's not an artist. She wasn't trying to be avant-garde. She wasn't trying to be like break the system or anything. She's just doing her best. And suddenly she was descended on by the mob of the internet, the largest, most destructive mob in the history of mankind. Descended on her, insulted her. They put her on TV, just like Rebecca Black, just like Monica Lewinsky, put her on TV making fun of her. She was probably in an SNL skit. I don't know if that's true, but probably. Literally, talk show hosts making jokes about it. Probably the most crushing bullying that can happen to a person ever in existence. And I do think she is going to become one of these stories, much like Rebecca Black and Monica Lewinsky, where the bullying is going to define her future probably. And she's going to come back and be like, this happened to me and here's how I dealt with it. And she'll help like a million other people being bullied in the future. So more power to ray gun, keep breakdancing in Olympics, ship it all the way.
So
it's
interesting. I think back and there have been other instances, like I don't know if any of you have heard of Eddie the Eagle, the British ski jumper. He never was going to make a medal, and really and it was kind of the ray gun kind of thing. It was like, he just went out there and did his best, and everybody was kind of rooting for Eddie the Eagle to score big. And that was kind of because that was an older reference. And then you talk about the mob descending down. A similar situation happened in the pistol shooting events as well, with the guy from
Turkey.
Thank you.
Yeah, Turkey.
That he was an older guy. He didn't have all the fancy gear and everything, and they descended on him as being, oh my gosh, this guy is like a hitman. He's just like, and it was like he was a really good shooter, and he's been competing for a very long time, and he didn't have the extra, blinder on his glasses and things like that, and everybody was shooting with their hand in their pocket. So it's like, you guys are taking this way out of context. The guy's just an old guy that knows how to shoot. And I can call him old because he's actually a year older than me, but
Little different there though, because he was like the coolest guy ever. You know what I mean? Like nobody was like, he's an assassin, and there was no bullying there. It was more like, that's so cool. Whereas like ray gun, I'm sure, is just getting like death threats and whatever. You're the worst person ever. She's the worst. That kind of thing. But still, I get what you mean. It's a weird internet mob thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if the claims are substantiated yet or not, but my understanding is there was some shenanigans around how ray gun actually got to the Olympics. Like there were other people more qualified that should have made it through, but there was some weird stuff going on. I don't know. It's probably conspiracy theory stuff, but
I'm sure the
that was
documentary
something.
will come out soon, and
Yes,
maybe
will
my
be.
opinion will change. But as far as I know, I don't know. So far, it
Well,
looks pretty
I mean,
legit, but we'll see.
if it was honestly just she's given her best and she did the best she could, okay, I'll take back my statement. But if it was shenanigans that like somebody else that should have been there instead of her, then I'm gonna stand by it.
I will pistol whip the next person who says shenanigans. That's a movie reference. Hopefully, you
I
know
love the movie reference. I love it, love it, love it. Yes, I'll go guzzle some maple syrup just to.
All right,
Boom. He knows it.
so time for our final segment, everybody's favorite, the lightning round. Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
Yes, I have, because I'm an old man with no fashion sense. So yes, I have. Also, my feet get really cold.
Yeah, I like it. All right, scale of 1 to 10. How good are you at wiffle ball?
Never played. 0.
0. Okay. We would have accepted 10 as well.
Mm-hmm. What's the fastest speed you have ever driven in a car?
That's a good question. It would probably be 150 kilometers per hour because I'm Canadian. We use kilometers here.
So 150 kilometers.
I think it's about 90 miles an hour, I think.
Let's see. You're correct. It's 150. Well, 93.21 miles per hour.
And this might be an interesting question because if you do live in Canada, so there may be interesting differences in the way we do carnival food here. What is your favorite carnival food?
Oh, well, I don't even know what they're called. There's these little mini donuts that they make, and they're really, really fried, and they're really, really tasty. And they just douse them in like cinnamon and sugar. But I can't remember what they're called. There's like a name for them, but I'll call them mini donuts. But it's like there's a more specific name for that. Just wish I could remember. Do you guys have
Seems
that?
like a lot of fried dough going on at carnivals here too. We dig our fried dough, elephant ears, funnel cake. Those are my favorites. Like that kind of a thing for sure.
I was totally banking on hearing poutine, but
it's not really a carnival food. That is a cuisine. That is like some, that's
it's cuisine. All right. Do you like the word dapper?
I'm a Dapper Dan man. Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy the word dapper.
Right.
When people stand up for a standing ovation, are you usually one of the earlier people to stand up or one of the later people to stand up?
I guess I'm in the middle because as soon as I start people rising, I will stand up. So like even if it wasn't a standing ovation, if people just started standing up, I'd be like, I don't know what's going on, but I'll stand up quick just to make sure. So I'm not the guy. I don't know. Is the national anthem happening? What's going on? Why are we standing?
Yeah. What is this? I better do the same thing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, if we ever get a chance to meet, I will ask, please bring some ketchup chips down from the Great White North. I've heard this is an amazing thing. I've never partaken in a ketchup chip just yet, but I've heard they're amazing.
Also going to bring you some all dressed chips in case you don't have those, which are delicious.
We do not.
Have you watched Letterkenny? They did a whole episode about what the best chip is.
Oh, I have seen Letterkenny, but I don't remember that episode.
It was one of the later seasons. It may be the latest season they did it. It was a whole episode dedicated, and somebody talked about the all dressed chip. I believe that was one of the popular ones.
It is extremely popular.
Very good. They had a whole debate about it. It was very good. Most of what I know is either from Strange Brew or Letterkenny about Canada.
That's all you need to know. You just nailed Canadian culture in one fell swoop there. That was great. That's all you need to know.
I'm more of a hockey guy, so Shoresy is my jam.
Okay. I consider Shoresy a wholly owned subsidiary, I guess. I consider that part of the Letterkenny,
Oh, it is. It's a total spinoff. Yeah. But with a lot of character crossover too. Yeah. It's great. I like it because it's a little bit more end-to-end Canadian instead of just like, wherever Letterkenny is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've
All right.
gone through everything.
Yeah, and then some. Thank you to our guest, Adam Barrett, for joining us today, and my beautiful co-host, James Carmen. I am Aaron Chesney. This has been the / where we lean into the future of IT. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for future episodes wherever you get your podcast from. And thank you and good night.